We'll just let that cool down there for a minute. Since we just quenched that, and it's really big, someone should ask me, how much water or how much volume do you need to quench something?
How much volume do you need to quench something?
Thank you. So, before I answer that, I want to take my sweatshirt off. Can you help me with the,
Stick your other piece in.
Yes, let me do that before we start with our explanation. All right, so the next part that I want to show is creating this blade profile. So we'll work with this piece here. And I think we'll be able to come right at the end.
There's coffee already.
Oh, is it 4 minutes? I forgot that. All right. Yeah. All right, so let me make sure I have the correct pair of tongs here to get this heated, and then I'll answer the question that was so graciously asked on my behalf. Okay. That's perfect. Okay, so how do we know how much quench fluid we need when we're quenching something? And the reason maybe we should talk about that is because cooling rate matters. I think I mentioned yesterday, I was talking about this Russian metallurgist from the 1860s who identified, he certainly wasn't the first one to identify, but he wrote a paper in which he kind of was the first to document that we had to have metal to some specific minimum temperature, and then if it wasn't that hot and we quenched it, it wouldn't get hard. And I don't know if I was sharing this story with the larger group, but this was one of the smaller group conversations I had. But he couldn't say exactly what the temperature should be because he didn't have a way to measure that with precision. He could give you a color. You could say based on, it's yellow or it's red or whatever. I need to have it that color to get it to harden. And if I don't have it hot enough, it won't harden. If I have it too hot, other bad things will happen. And that hardening temperature that I need to heat to, I know that changes based on the carbon content. So 1868, he writes that down on paper. But he also talked about the need to cool things fast enough. If you don't cool them fast enough, they won't get hard. So how fast is fast enough? Well, you could actually put numbers on that, which I don't recall, but it is actually really fast. But fast enough varies an awful lot with the type of material you have and the size of the workpiece. So to sort of simply answer the question, which was, how much volume do I need in my average everyday blacksmith shop environment to effectively heat treat things that I might make, I would recommend something like at least 1 gallon per pound of whatever it is you're doing. If it's assuming it's a grade that needs to be liquid quenched, if you're dealing with something else, of course, you're air hardened or whatever. But I would say that's probably a sort of a minimum, because let's say I have this hammer, for example. This is a little under 5 pounds, 4.5 pound hammer. So I could probably quench that in a 5 gallon pail of water or oil if that's what I needed. But I'd probably only be able to do one. And then the quench fluid would likely be too warm, and I'd have to let it cool down. So if you're doing work at that size, you're going to probably, especially if you're doing much of it, you're going to want a larger quench fluid. If you're doing, some small things like the little blacksmith knife that I made on Friday afternoon is just a kind of a play around piece. If this is the sort of work that you're doing, a few gallons of quenching oil or water, if that's what you're using, should be adequate. In the case of this thing that I just threw in the quench tank that's 13 pounds, that's probably maybe just about enough like you said, it's already up to hot coffee temperature, right? So when we're water quenching, we typically keep the water temperature under 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So if your quench thing, your quench is so massive that you're going to get your water hotter than that, then you probably want a bigger volume of water. At work, with the great big massive things that we do, the quench tanks in the shop that I work in, we have two of them, and they're both 50,000 gallon quench tanks. They're big, they're like swimming pools. One of them is filled with water, the other one is filled with a water-soluble polymer quench fluid. We don't quench in oil. Lots of shops use oil. It's very traditional. It works very well, provided you have the correct oil for what it is you're trying to do. There's a downside to oil, and the reason we're not using it in our shops have to do with some of the safety concerns associated with oil. Oil will definitely flame, and it also gives off a lot of smoke and fumes, and it splashes on the floor with slicker. So when they built the shop back in the 1970s, they elected to go with a water-soluble polymer product instead of the oil. There's not many people I know that use water-soluble polymer in a small shop environment. I'm sure you could, but it's just not, people I don't think are as aware of it. Much more frequently you see oil. Oil is what you see recommended in a lot of the reference materials because oil's been around a lot longer. There are different kinds of oils, and so sometimes people are interested in knowing what sort of oil should be used. And can I get away with using an oil that's not specifically designed as a quenching oil? So in the I think it was in the 1880s, a guy named E.F. Houghton came up with a specific quenching oil that was developed particularly for that application. Prior to that, what had been used were certainly water, but other types of oil-based products. You could have regular animal fat, vegetable oils. A common one that you see in old literature is whale oil. That was used actually up into the mid-1900s. People still have whale oil in some of the shops. And it worked. But the natural sort of oils that are derived from animals, they break down over time, go rancid, they lose their effectiveness as a quench, and so they lead to, over time, inconsistent performance. In manufacturing, we really like consistency. We want to know that what I did yesterday and what I did tomorrow are going to give me the same results. And if my quench media and its characteristics are changing over time, I don't have that reliability. This guy recognized that, and he was able to come up with some alternate oil blends that did a better job of meeting those needs. Today, built on that, there are more oil options that will let you do different things with cooling and cooling speeds. And of course, we have lots more steel available to us steels have different characteristics, and some of them don't need to be cooled so fast as the early steels needed to be cooled. And so different types of oils with slower cooling rates can give you still good performance and lower risk of cracking. So there are commercial oils that are available today that are designed specifically to meet that need. And that's what is certainly used in industry, and that's what you see used by a lot of people who are in the knife making community. They've identified some particular products that work well for knives. A couple different brands. Parks 50 is one that you hear people talk about a lot. I'm not sure if it's still available under that name, but I think there's other suppliers that have products that behave in a similar way. These are oils that are going to have a pretty fast cooling rate, and so that's beneficial because you need to cool fast enough, especially with the more simplistic knife steels that some people like to use. Those do need to be cooled pretty rapidly. The ones that are more complicated can be cooled much more slowly, often air hardening, so you don't need the liquid quench benefits. one of the things that's kind of interesting, I didn't bring the books that have the good pictures, so I have to sketch this, but when you're quenching something, and one of the reasons why oil is sometimes preferred over water for certain quenching operations is of how the fluid interacts with the object being quenched. So if we have a bath, let's say we have some kind of an aquarium or large container filled with our quench fluid, and we take a metal object and we'll just plunge it into that quench bath. We'll just leave it there, no stirring or agitating, we'll just leave it there. If you're using water, what will happen is that you will end up with a steam jacket that is formed around here initially. And that steam is very insulating. And then, shortly after that, the steam will start to get boiling. And it's at that point in the process where you have boiling that you really begin to see rapid cooling happening. But that rapid cooling is delayed a little bit by this steam jacket. This is one of the reasons that water is sometimes not preferred. With oil, because oil has different characteristics than water, when you do this, you don't get a steam jacket. With oil, sometimes you actually need to heat your oil because oils are a little bit thicker at lower temperatures. And what you're trying to do is get a situation going on where the cooler oil that's on down here and your hot piece, which is heating the oil, so that oil wants to float, you're trying to create a current of oil going up like this. And if you're holding your object still, you have to rely on like convection currents to make that happen. So having the oil warmed up makes this happen more easily. It gives you faster initial cooling. And so actually, it is for that reason that sometimes an oil quench under certain circumstances will actually give you faster cooling initially than the water quench because the water has this insulating layer around it. The oil doesn't end up with that. But there's different kinds of oils and different preferred operating temperatures for those oils. So if you're going to do commercial oil quenching, you'd want to consult the recommendations of the oil manufacturer as to how hot it should be to get the best performance. A lot of people will use other oils just because as blacksmiths we tend to be super frugal. Some would call us cheap. And so we will use other things because commercial products usually are a higher priced item. Yeah?
Okay. These water-soluble polymers, I assume they're available in different rates of cooling as there are oils.
I think that's true, yes. There are different blends that are available, yes.
Now, is that something that would be available to a home blacksmith, or is it something that only comes in 50-gallon barrels for $1,000 a barrel? Would it be economically feasible for a home blacksmith to use that instead of this?
Yeah, so the question is, are water-soluble polymers available in small enough quantity where we could just go buy them in a 5-gallon pail and take them home? I do not know the answer to that because my experience has only been with buying them by the tanker load. I suspect that you could get someone to provide a trial batch because there are people who do smaller scale work with Scott Forge and they don't need a whole tanker load. Maybe it would be a 55-gallon drum, that would be the minimum quantity, but at that point, that might be the kind of thing where a club could go together and then divide it amongst the members if they were interested in doing it. You'd have to contact the supplier and see what their policies are on that.
Are there any health issues with using this stuff?
So that the next question was, are there any health issues? You'd have to look at an MSDS sheet. As far as how we use it, of course, we've got large containers on it. We're quenching in it and bringing pieces back up out of it. Sometimes you get some vaporization of that. We've done some testing within the shop and haven't identified that as a health hazard. Like many things, hazard effects are variable based on the kind of exposure you get. So if you have exposure to something in a very concentrated form, it may be different than if you're exposed to a diluted. And usually this stuff is highly diluted with water. It's water soluble, so you're going to take and have so many gallons of water to a gallon of this. And you have to look at what that proportion is. I don't know it off the top of my head.
So it's not a replacement for water, it's used in conjunction.
Right. Yes, so that's good. Yes, it's not a replacement for water. It's really used as a replacement for oil. We don't want to use oil because of like the concerns, the safety concerns that we have. You use polymer as a replacement for the oil, and that's what it was really developed for. Yes.
When you use it commercially, then do you have to go through a special mixing process so you don't get fish eyes mixing it, or?
No, they just empty the tanker into the quench tank, and then we have big agitators in the quench tank. So that's the other thing is, in my little illustration here, made the assumption that you've just got a stagnant container and you're plunging your object in and holding it still. But in industrial practice, what's typically done is you don't have a stagnant container, you have a container that has large agitators, mechanical agitators, impellers that cause quite a bit of stirring so that you are minimizing the steam jacket effect. And so when we get, that polymer in, comes in a tanker, they empty it right into the bath, and the agitators are going in.
You have to use slow mixing. I worked with dry and liquid polymers in the water
Okay.
treatment process. You didn't want to tear the polymer chain, and you had issues with the mixing.
I don't know the answer to that. You'd have to talk to the manufacturer about it, but I don't think it would be as sensitive as what you've just asked about. Because we use, in service, it's all, those impellers are going all the time, or most of the time, and when you see a tank that's being what we would consider highly agitated, it's like, you can't quite surf on it, but it's moving, the water's moving pretty good. Or the fluid, whether it's water or polymer, it's pretty highly agitated.
Do you remember the commercial name?
Yeah, so we use a product that's called Yukon, and there's different versions for different applications. And I'm trying to remember who the supplier is. And it escapes me at the moment. I'd have to go back and look that up. Who the supplier is.
I just pulled some up.
Okay, yeah.
It's like a 5-gallon bucket. It's like $125, $150.
Okay, so that's probably, reasonable amount. I don't know what the oil costs, but maybe a comparative amount. I'm not sure. I saw another question on this side, yeah.
How often do you change your quench fluid?
So the question is, how often do you change the quench fluid? So water has to be changed or cooled if it's getting to be too hot. So we have some great big chillers that we can pump the water through those chillers, but there are times when that's not sufficient and you'll actually empty the tank out and bring fresh water in. Usually that happens more frequently in the summer when the chillers are not as effective. And the frequency of having to do that really just depends on how much metal you're trying to quench in a day or in a period of time. The polymer is different. The polymer has a higher working temperature. Usually we're using that polymer in the temperature range for the one that we're using between about 120 and 140 Fahrenheit. And so you are less likely to exceed the maximum working temperature with that material. What happens with the polymer, at least for us, is that over time, as you quench and you bring a part up out of that quench bath, you don't always quench things down to the quench bath temperature. Sometimes you stop the quench while the part is still several hundred degrees. And so when you do that and you raise the piece up out of the quench bath, there's a little film of polymer that remains on there, and that will kind of vaporize off. And so over time, what happens is that the concentration of the ratio of polymer to water in the tank changes. And so they monitor that, and typically at least once a month, they're checking that. And if they need to adjust it, they can always add a little bit more polymer back to it. Yeah. Other questions? Okay, this is hot, so I'm going to go back to this piece. So now what we're going to do, we started on just creating the area that's going to become this part, and I did that so I could have a tong hold back here. That tong hold will eventually become this blade. But now we're gonna work on this blade because I want to be able to use this as a handle for later in the process. So here what we're gonna do, we have a piece that I've already forged to 2.5 inches by 1 inch by 4. I want to section off 1 inch and leave it at that dimension, and then the 3 inches I'm going to draw out. I'm going to taper it both through its length and through its width. That might take a couple of heats to do. To make that transition, I could use a side set tool. I could also use just a piece of round stock to give myself a little radius. I think that's kind of what I did on this one. I think we'll use the side set tool today. And sure, I put the big one on there. This is what we have right now. So I created the side set and started to draw the blade section down. And I'm shooting for just 1/2 inch thick by 2.5 inches wide, just to start with.